Нет, знаешь, не знаю, дверь это не страшно. Мало звуки заходят, что сделать. Ну, отсутствует.
Hello, welcome everybody who has joined us for this first Global Greens Spotlight series. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we've got people from all corners of the world at the moment, and truly a testament to our Global Greens movement. Fantastic. We will get started in a few moments. We'll give it 2 or 3 minutes for people just to join, and then I will start the introductions. Okay, thank you very much. In the meantime, some of you are doing already. Please do say hello in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you are, how you are, what party you're from. And of course, you can communicate with each other through the chat as well throughout the webinar as well. Share ideas and get connected and share your thoughts. And of course, share your solidarity with Ukraine. We've got 2 wonderful speakers from Ukraine here today as well. Okay, so we'll start in about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, thank you. Great, I think we have people from the Netherlands here. Hello from Florida, Munich, great, from the Flemish Islands, from New Zealand, hello, Western Australia, hello, and Korea, Croatia, some more from Australia. Thanks for joining us. It's probably late in your Saturday night. Thanks for joining us today. France, Romania, Sweden, more Germany, New Zealand, Australia. Hello from Oxford. It's a place I know quite well, my time in the UK. Hello from France, from Colorado, from Japan. Hello from Italy. Hello, good to see you there. More from the US. Hello from Budapest in Hungary. Some from Massachusetts in the US. Fantastic. Hello from the UK. Hello back at you. More people from New Zealand. Wow, it is late on a Saturday night for you guys. Thanks for joining us. There's an update from Maita talking about the refugees joining in, excuse me if I pronounce it wrong, Nijmegen in the Netherlands. Together with other volunteers in the municipalities, we are working hard to get everything organized and give them a warm welcome. Fantastic. That's really great to hear. Thanks for sharing that. If anybody else has any stories or things they'd like to share, please do pop that in the chat. Hello from Estonia, hello from Devon. A contingent from Australia and New Zealand, great to see. Wow, lovely. Green Party of England and Wales, lovely. USA, from Spain, from the Czech Republic, from Japan, from Moldova. Hello, Olga, thanks for joining us. From Mexico, wonderful. Wow, I don't know what time it is in Mexico. Is it late on Friday night, early Saturday morning? I don't know. Wonderful. We have from Canberra, from Romania. Excellent. 5 a.m. Thanks, Mike. 5 a.m. Wonderful. From Dorset. Fantastic. Okay. We'll just give it one more minute, guys, and then we will get started. All right. And again, if you are just joining us, please do pop your name and say a big hello in the chat. You may know some names, you may not. Again, you can use the chat function to connect with each other. We are a global green movement. We are here to show solidarity with Ukraine today, find out more what's happening on the ground, and of course, learn from some other experts who've been documenting refugees, who understand the global dynamics of conflict and with food security as well. So it's a really interesting lineup today. (11 p.m. on Saturday night in New Zealand. Thank you, Pleasance. Wow, wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Liz. Liz from the Green Party of England and Wales. Good to see you there. Thank you. All right, and one last time, I think a few more people have jumped in there. Again, if you're just joining us, welcome. We're about to get started. If you'd like to indicate who you are and where you are and how you are, and again, you can use the chat function to chat with each other, of course. Let us know where you're from, and of course, connect with each other as well. Do give a shout out to friendly faces and names. I'm sure many of you know each other, but of course, you can use this opportunity to connect as well. All right. Okay, let's begin. We're on 5 past the hour. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Frank Sheridan. I work with the Global Greens. We're very privileged and honored to run our first Spotlight Series webinar today. So an interesting lineup. We all know, I don't need to give much introduction to the situation at the moment, but of course, there's been a terrible invasion of Ukraine. We won't spell the details of that, I'll leave that for the speakers to talk about there. But we stand in solidarity with Ukraine. We stand in solidarity with all the people involved in this conflict and this needless, tragic conflict. I want to thank Tetiana and Serhii in particular for giving us their time, and they'll be speaking directly from Kyiv, I believe, about the situation there too. I'd like to take this moment to reflect on all needless conflicts around the world. I think we're all here because we share the same values and the same beliefs. Sadly, the Ukraine is not the only situation happening in the world right now, and it does help us spotlight the injustices and the power dynamics and the senselessness of it, really. And I'd like to just give a moment to reflect. And we've all got stories and understandings of our parts of the world, and I'm sure we can express that too. But one more time, just express our solidarity with the people of Ukraine and say thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we're honored to be able to offer you a spotlight and give some broader regional and global contexts, because this does affect us all, and it will continue to affect us all. Okay, let me begin introducing some of the speakers. We've got 5 speakers today. We're very, very honored to introduce Tetiana Bodun and Serhii Kurykin from the Green Party of Ukraine. Tetiana is the International Secretary of the Green Party and a longtime environmental activist. She's been a friend of the Global Greens and having been to many of our councils, and she'll be giving us an update on the current situation in Ukraine with Serhii. Serhii is also in the Green Party of Ukraine. He's a dedicated environmental activist for 3 decades. He's the former Minister of Ecology and Natural Resources of Ukraine, twice, and the head of the Department of Ecology and Natural Resources in Kyiv too. He knows a lot about the environmental space and the impact of what's happening in Ukraine too. I'm also honored to introduce Gianmarco Maraviglia, who'll be talking today from Italy. He's a renowned international photojournalist who specializes in social and environmental stories. He's just working with the Washington Post, having been posted himself in Moldova and Transnistria, documenting refugees, the plight and the situation of the people there seeking safety away from their homes. Thank you to Gianmarco. I'm also honored to introduce Dr. Peter Alexander, who's a senior lecturer in global food systems and security from the University of Edinburgh. He focuses on social, economic, and ecological interactions with food and land use systems. And in understanding the global implications of the Ukrainian crisis, he'll look at the wider implications that will have on our food systems. We're all global Greens, and we know about the environmental movement and the impact of climate change on food. But of course, we live in an era of intersectional crises, and I think we can all understand in our respective countries there is already an impact there. So I'm very happy to hear from Dr. Peter today. And finally, we'll be hearing from Dr. Eyal Mayroz. He's a senior lecturer from the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Sydney. He's a member of the Genocide Prevention Advisory Network, an international group of experts who advise governments on the causes, consequences, and prevention of genocide and other mass atrocities. He's written books on this, and he'll be giving a global context to the conflict within this line today. All right, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody in between and outside of those binary definitions. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you just joined in, we're about to start. We have 5 excellent speakers. Again, do say hello in the chat. Please do be mindful, the chat is obviously a public space, and we are here to work with peace, diversity, ultimately non-violence, which is sad given the context of our webinar today. But please be mindful it is a public space, but do share your thoughts, share your solidarity. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Tetiana and to Serhii. You now have the floor. Thank you so much for joining us, Tetiana, please.
Hello, dear Green friends. Hello. I am Tetiana and I am from Ukraine. The problem of human survival were put on the shoulders of the Green. A few days ago, the first Green Party on the planet, which originated in Tasmania, celebrated its 5th anniversary. Congratulations to them. Congratulations to them sincerely. The German Greens recently celebrated the 40th anniversary. For 30 years, the Green Party of Ukraine has the idea of humanism and non-violence, but it all ended on February 24. It was on this day that the Russian occupation made a full-scale invasion in Ukraine. A terrible war started. And for me, the stage of pacifism is over. Because when the occupation bombed the maternity hospital, fire on civil Ukraine, we need to think about how they repel this attack. And Ukrainian Greens are defending Ukraine, some with weapons in their hands, some with an information campaign, some with humanitarian aid. War in 21st century, ignoring all international treaties, Russian troops led by the new Nazi Putin invaded Ukraine in order to instill in us the so-called Russian peace. And the Russian peace means the unfinished Soviet idea of domination of all the whole world. This is modern Nazism. That is why today we are forced to address you, the Green of Africa and Asia and Australia, America, and of course, Europe, being in solidarity with the Ukrainian people who are fighting for their freedom and independence in difficult conditions. Our cities and villages were bombed. Rockets fly to our kindergartens and schools. Our children and old people die of hunger and cold. Ukraine's economy has been hit hard. Our NATO received no less of a blow. And the worst thing is that Russian troops are resorting to nuclear terrorists. They seized 2 nuclear power plants in Ukraine. The infamous Chernobyl, which we, the Ukrainian Greens, closed in 2000, and the largest in Europe, Zaporizhia. This is challenging not only for Ukraine, but also for all mankind. Understand, this is not a local war, because without Ukrainian bread, many countries will starve. But the people of Ukraine and our army continue to fight. The Russian occupiers are not welcome or expected anywhere in Ukraine. Today, I would like to thank the Green of Poland, Moldova, Romania, for helping Ukrainian women and children seeking protection in Europe for the first days. We are extremely grateful to you. I thank all the Green parties that support us in addressing the governments to close the sky over Ukraine, to accelerate the Ukrainian memberships in European Union, to stop nuclear terrorism. Thank you. I know that Putin spent a lot of money on propaganda around the world. Do not believe this lie. Ukrainian is fighting for its independence, for democracy and freedom. That is why I appeal to all the Greens colleagues of the planet with only one request. Tell the truth about the war, help Ukraine, protect the future on the entire planet. Ukrainian lives matter. I am Tetiana. I am from Ukraine. I am from Kyiv and Mariupol. I am from Kherson and Sumy. I am from large city and small village. I am for here or Europe. Ukraine is Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tetiana. That's really beautiful, and thank you for sharing your experience there. I can honestly say we can only imagine how difficult it is for you and what's happening there. We can only imagine. We watch on the news, and you know we have our solidarity and support, but really, you're just incredibly brave, and thank you so much for sharing what you have done there. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Would Serhii, would you like to share a few thoughts and a few words, please, Serhii, if you're available?
Yes, thank you, Frank. Do you hear me well?
Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I would like to say thanks for everybody who participated in this webinar today. We appreciate for your empathy and for your readiness to be with us in these hard days. I have also special thanks to Global Greens who have arranged this. Concerning the situation in Ukraine now, I would like to stress that efforts of aggressor now concentrated on the southeast of Ukraine. It is less intensive fighting in north of Ukraine. It is more silent situation around the Kyiv, but anyway, I'm hearing here the explosions every day and the shooting sometimes and so on, but not so intensive as it was before. Anyway, Russian troops will not stop their aggression, and unfortunately, nobody can predict how long it will last. I have some general remarks about this situation for better understanding, because maybe not all the specificity of this war is possible to say. are visible from other countries or even from other continents. First, what I must check it is that this war was not launched February 24 this year. It is going since 2014 year and simply entered in its hottest phase now. So-called Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic are the Russian projects established, developed, and supplied by Russian Federation. There was never any objects for defense, but tools for military political pressure on Ukraine within the last 8 years. The Russian army invaded Ukraine. The Russian army which invaded Ukraine is not any defender of somebody. It is just a gang of murderers, rapists, and looters. They fight successfully against civilians mainly. So the war is a chain of terrible military crimes of Russian militaries, which must be case for international court in future. And I am completely agree with Tetiana, who says that terrorism, only nuclear terrorism menace, but we should take into consideration that civilian infrastructure is destroyed systemically, and mainly civilian people are the victims of this bloody war. I have to check that if the international community reacted properly and strongly in 2014, when mentioned parts of Ukraine and Crimea were separated, it would be peace now. If the international community reacted properly and strongly to Russian invasion in Georgia in 2008, the aggression against Ukraine in 2014 would not happen at all. Lack of proper and strong international reaction encouraged the Russian Federation to further violations of the basic principles of international relations. Unfortunately, the world community always is late and too moderate in their reaction on brutal violation of international rules and international law. It was reasons or even pretext to invasion, no danger or menace to Russia from Ukrainian side. All the Russian action based on the fake accusation, distortion of reality, demonization of Ukraine, NATO, and whole Western world. Only real source of aggression is Russian strive to military political expansion for restoration its own sphere of influence in the Eastern Europe and rebuild the world's security architecture up to the Cold War standards. The super aims of Russia is to create as wide as possible geopolitical area around countries which will be only shadows of Russian regime. Russians are hostages of their own myths and fantasies about the desire of Ukrainians to be part of the people of Russia, but some nationalists and fascists in Ukraine allegedly prevent this. This is a stupid approach, but unfortunately, this vision is rather popular, unfortunately, in some other countries as well. Last but not least, I would like to stress that we are extremely disappointed with the role and place of international organizations. Unfortunately, United Nations, Organization for Security in Europe, and many others who has a serious mandate in the sphere of keeping of security didn't fulfill their obligations and their mission. They were not able to prevent the war. And unfortunately, when the war started, all of them, including International Atomic Agency, including even Red Cross, demonstrate their helplessness now. And after this war, their mandates and capacities must be deeply reviewed. Perhaps some of them should be eliminated at all, even because this organization give us any visible results of their activity. Unfortunately, I have to stress that the green community also was not prepared enough to this challenge. Tetiana already said about the pacifism which is misplaced in this case. And I see that all of us Greens, we must make a really painful choice between our pacifistic, between our non-violent approaches and need to resist to real aggression and real bombing, real war. But unfortunately, word doesn't work against sword in this case, and we must recognize that sometimes that aggression can be stopped only with military force, unfortunately. We Ukrainian Greens, we are really disappointed with the position of European Greens, unfortunately. It's pity, but it is true. They kept the silence till the very last moment. They even didn't pass the military and political expansion of Russia, which we issued, which was issued 3 weeks before the war. And now different parties demonstrates different level of readiness to react properly for what happened. I believe that the situation will be improved, that that all of us will make our lessons. We will extract our lessons from this situation, and further the Greens will pay much more attention for security issues in their everyday activity. So that's all for the moment. If it will be certain questions or remarks, I'm ready for answer. Thank you, people. Thank you, friends, for your attention.
No, thank you so much, Serhii. And again, just to reflect on what I shared with Tetiana too, we can only imagine how difficult it is to see what's happening in your country, and to have known this has been coming. You know, this is not a new situation. People outside of the area might have heard of sort of issues going on, but of course, if you're Ukrainian or in the zone, you've known there's been a very, very significant threat for quite some time now, and it's not unexpected in that way. We can only hope that there is a swift resolution to this. There's a peaceful resolution that stops the bloodshed and the wrongful invasion as quickly as possible, and that we all take on board something from this and learn how to act early to stop any further invasions of any sovereign country or region or peoples in the future. So thank you very much, Serhii. We don't have quite time for questions, unfortunately. We're a little bit over time already, but I really want to give extra time for Tetiana and Serhii there, of course, because they're in Ukraine too. If people do have questions, please do pop them in the Q&A. To any of the panelists, keep an eye on the Q&A there. If you feel you can answer some of those questions and you're able to, please do pop your responses on there as well. I very much appreciate that. Let's move on to our next speaker, somebody else who's had a lot of experience in the neighbouring countries, Gianmarco Maraviglia, who's a photojournalist who has been documenting the plight and concerns and issues of refugees in Moldova and Transnistria. Next there. Gianmarco, over to you.
Hi, hello to everybody, and thanks for this invitation. It's a pleasure. Yeah, as you told me, I'm a photojournalist, and I'm more focused on aftermath and consequences of war, more than documenting the front line. I think that we can better understand what does it mean to be in a war through the world who is really facing this war more than taking picture of the front line. My job is focused on refugee in many places, many countries. I visited hundreds of refugee camps, and what I saw in Moldova is something that I never experienced before. Consider that Moldova is the poorest country in Europe, and they now are facing like 400,000 persons coming from Ukraine to Moldova, and it was not ready at all, basically. But the reaction of the country not only in terms of institution, but also in terms of private, and the response of the people, it's something amazing. I never saw something like this. The camp and the refugee center that they set up in quite a short time are very, very well organized. The people are opening the private houses, especially in the rural areas and near the border, especially near the border in Palanca. Palanca is the main crossing point for refugees from Ukraine to Moldova. Of course, they feel a kind of very strong empathy towards the people coming from Ukraine, because they share at the moment the same will to be part of the Western world, more than the former Soviet world that they both experienced in a bad way. That's my personal feeling. All the person I spoke with coming from Ukraine and the Moldovan people who decided to open their house for them, they share the same nightmare, that is, we don't want to live under another kind of Soviet state. And if you think about the Moldovan society, is not so different what they experience with the '92 war, when the Transnistria has been declared independent. So the people in Moldova are afraid that Transnistria could be for them what Donbas has been for Ukraine. Is the same dynamics. So I'm very, very happy about the reaction of the Moldovan country. And after seeing many refugee situations, is the first time that not only in Moldova, but globally speaking, the feeling of empathy towards people fleeing the war has never been so strong for me. If we think about, Syrian, Yemeni people, all the people coming to Western country, this is the first time that all the world is so welcoming the Ukrainian refugee, and for me this is a very good point. Okay, yeah, you can see the picture now. I hope that my images made for Washington Post can maybe tell you something more than my words. I think I'm more able to tell something with pictures than words. For example, this is a very small kids, but another interesting story we made there during my couple of weeks for Washington Post was the situation of the few men we met, because as you know, for the martial law, if you are in the age between 18 and 60, you cannot leave the country. The few men we met over there, but they made up to left the country. They were devastated. They tell us their story crying like a baby, because okay, they have their life saved, but they told me, I can never come back to Ukraine because somehow I left the country and I didn't fight for the freedom of my country. That's my personal experience.
Okay, thank you, Gianmarco. That was wonderful. That's a really interesting.
I don't have many other things to say. I hope that my picture can tell you more of what I saw in the refugee camp and refugee center over there.
Absolutely, you're a photojournalist. The pictures sometimes speak a million words, don't they? So these are really sort of emotional and impactful pictures you've taken, Gianmarco. Thank you. Perhaps I might say, Gianmarco, if you want to put a link to your website or any of the put pictures you've had published into the chat so other people can look through them too.
Of course.
That would be really valuable, and people feel welcome to express to Gianmarco your feelings on his pictures too. They really are wonderful, and the humanity we can see in the images is really quite something. Thank you so much for sharing your experience there, Gianmarco. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Okay, sorry guys, we are a little bit over time already, but I want to make sure, we give each speaker the due course that they have. So we may go a little bit over the hour to finish with. I hope that's okay. I think you can all appreciate this is worth bearing with and to hearing these different perspectives. So we've heard from Tetiana and Serhii very movingly about their perspective and life and experience and literally just what is happening in Ukraine. We watch the news, but they are living it, and perhaps when we are writing in the chat, we can be mindful of that, please. We've heard from Gianmarco giving the sort of regional perspective in Moldova and how people are just opening their hearts and homes and doing everything they can to support people who are forced unnecessarily from their homeland through this needless invasion. But of course, there are global implications to what's happening. I'm sure many of us know something of these things already. We spoke about energy. I think that's a big thing. Some people have written things in the chat too. But I'd like to introduce Dr. Peter Alexander, who is a food systems specialist. He's going to speak about the global implications of the invasion of Ukraine and how that will impact, us all and the globe, basically. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you. I hope somebody's going to be doing the slides for me. Can I have my title slide, please? Great, thank you. So yes, so I'm not competent, and I'm not going to talk about anything that's happening within Ukraine specifically, but more the consequences that may have for the global food system, which is kind of where my research has been focused for the last decade or so, and more typically thinking about the impacts on climate change, how that impacts food, and about how the food system and agriculture and land use impacts climate, sort of the two-way coupling, as it were. So I was an IPCC lead author for the Working Group 2 report that came out 2 weeks ago. So obviously that has some relevance to the group here, but that's not really my focus in this talk. Next slide, please. So I guess we've all heard and talked about and read in the newspapers how Russia and Ukraine both form breadbasket countries and provide large amounts of exports to the rest of the world, specifically of cereals and also of oil crops. So I saw some comments about that in the chat. So I've kind of divided this up into the first two slides, kind of almost like the case that's the somewhat sensationalized, in my view, case that you read in the media, and then sort of a counterpoint to that in the next slide. So yes, it's true to say that nearly 30% of global exports in wheat come from Russia and Ukraine combined in the last few years. So that's roughly, to give 55 million tons of exports. In cereals, again, 20% of global exports of cereals. Yeah, sort of they're considering rice and maize as well as wheat. So these are very big numbers, and obviously again you read very frequently, and it's correct that most of those exports go to the Middle East and South Asia. So countries like Egypt are very exposed, with they hear 84% of their imports from Russia and Ukraine. So you can very quickly tell a story about how that's going to be very difficult for the global food system to deal with. But I'm not going to tell that story today. I'm going to tell a slightly different story. Next slide, please. One back. Yeah. So, I mean, all the stats in the previous slide are correct. I've just taken them all from this FAO report that was from November 21. But I think it's a fairer way to look at it in a slightly different way. So most cereals are produced and consumed in the same country. So if we just look at the imports and exports, which we were doing in the previous slide, that's a somewhat distorted view. And actually only just less than 4% of cereals in the rest of the world, excluding Russia and Ukraine, come from Russia and Ukraine through exports. So rather than it being 20%, it's actually nearer kind of 4% as a real impact. And that sounds a lot less scary to me. And you know, going beyond that, actually we hold the world holds lots of stocks of cereals. One of the reasons why the staple crops like cereals are staples is they're relatively easy to store, because when they're dry you can just put them in a shed and you're good. So we hold large stocks. In fact, there's 800 million tons of cereal stocks outside of Russia and Ukraine at the end of last year, and nearly 300 million of wheat. So we could buffer the loss of those exports from Russia and Ukraine for multiple years without without a shortage per se. Now that doesn't mean that food prices might not go up, but it's not like there's a catastrophic shortage. And the last point here on this slide is actually when we think of wheat, for example, we immediately think of bread and pasta and biscuits and those type of products, which obviously are made of wheat. But actually a large amount of wheat and cereals go into producing livestock, producing meat, milk and eggs. So roughly a third of wheat is used for animal feed, and about half of all cereals are used for animal feed. So we can change what we produce and what we consume, to buffer any sort of loss of supply from Russia and Ukraine. So I think it's much less, yes, thank you. I think it's much less immediately disruptive, that loss of those exports. However, the sort of the energy price spikes that we've seen have a much more dramatic, I think, impact on food and agriculture. So energy is used sort of directly in agricultural production to fuel your tractors, and obviously transportation, which is the sort of second point here. But kind of a slightly less obvious but more important use is through inorganic fertilizers, which are produced by natural gas using the Haber-Bosch process. And the spike in gas prices, it directly leads on to a spike in fertilizer prices. So they've seen a tripling of those fertilizer prices in a year. So how much of that we can directly attribute to the war in Ukraine is a question I can't answer, but at least some of it I think we can. So yes, next slide please. So I wanted to explore, my intuition was that the loss of exports from Russia and Ukraine, were that to occur, would be less significant than the energy price spikes and how that impacts agricultural inputs. So I wanted to test that. So I'm going to give you a few modeling slides here. So basically I wanted to look at 4 scenarios. Effectively one scenario, which is the green one in the box here, is no shocks, kind of a very relatively stable, a counterfactual example, relatively stable prices, no export restrictions from Russia and Ukraine. And then sort of the orange one, which is the opposite, so higher energy prices and an energy restriction, and sort of the 2 other ones sort of with one of those 2 elements switched off. Next slide please. So this uses an existing model that I will provide here if you're interested to go and have a look at it. There's quite a number of published papers using this model. The information, data results I'm going to outline here are not published yet, so they're preliminary, but I think they're interesting nonetheless. And I don't have time to talk through the model in detail, so if you're interested, you can follow up using that link. Next slide, please. So in this slide, basically what we're doing isn't the slide I was expecting it to be. Can we have have you missed a slide? That's this. No, yeah. Oh no, it's all in the funny order. That's kind of weird. Okay, well, the order is not the order I was expecting, which is very strange. There's one which shows there's not this many slides either. Okay, right. Stop. Okay, we'll go with this one. The order is not so important. This is basically showing that on the left hand side is showing the price for different commodities under different scenarios, and effectively the conflict scenario is changes in energy prices and changes in export restrictions, and it has a big impact on costs of foods, roughly a doubling of food prices. But with just the restrictions in exports, the impact isn't very great. We'll have another slide, which will have to be a random choice. Okay, we can have a look at this one. So this is basically looking at the impact on human health due to dietary shifts as a consequence of higher prices. And basically what we see is that because the prices for foods are higher, we get greater rates of malnourishment, greater levels of people who are underweight, people who get greater cardiovascular diseases and other and diabetes and so forth because of reduced levels of fruit and veg consumption, and higher death rates as a result of that. And they are also regionally is provided regionally. So obviously, in general, the poorer countries and poorer regions suffer more detrimentally. Can we have the next one, please? Oh, we have to go back. I'd quite like the map. So basically, this is looking at the land use changes, the land use change consequences. I think the slide before that, but we'll just stick with this one for a second. Basically shows that because you have a higher input prices for fertilizer, then you tend to use less fertilizer, and you're incentivized more, therefore, to expand agricultural area in order to produce the food. To meet food demands. So the expansion of agricultural area tends to be in the tropics and other areas. So we're losing areas of the Amazon and tropics in Africa and Asia. So obviously that has biodiversity and greenhouse gas consequences as well. And we maybe try go back one slide, because I'm sure it's one slide, the ones we've missed. No, how very odd. Okay, doesn't matter. So we can go for the conclusion slide, which is basically that the higher input prices, higher fertilizer prices based on energy costs, have a much greater consequence for food security than potential losses of exports from Russia and Ukraine. And those higher prices also lead to expansion of agricultural area, which has environmental consequences. And I suppose from a human health perspective, we would expect to see from both of those, and as well as climate change, they all move towards higher food prices, which tends to exacerbate existing inequalities because people spend more of their incomes on food if they have lower incomes, and that leads to those higher food prices lead to greater rates of malnourishment and associated death and disease. Thank you. Not sure what happened to the slides. Sorry about that.
No problem at all, Peter. That's absolutely fine. That was really, really valuable and very, very insightful. As you can see, there are bigger impacts, and of course, the inequalities which are already embedded in the world and in the systems are already going to be exacerbated by this conflict. I think is definitely one of the take homes from that, and all the more reason why we need to work together to fight and strive for a more equal world and to end conflict and end the impact on the people who did the least to contribute towards it. And it seems to be this theme is just consistent throughout many of the issues that we're faced today. So wonderful. Thank you, Peter. That was really interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you. If anybody, I know some people have put in the chat comments regarding that material. Peter, if you wish, you're happy to put your email in there. Otherwise, if people want to email me at secretary@globalgreens.org, and I'll be happy to forward you any material Peter can forward on to me. So Peter, whichever way you want to play it, I'm happy to take that. Okay, put his email in the chat. I think Mohammed and a couple of people from Egypt and elsewhere asked for that. So great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Peter. Next, and for our last and final excellent speaker today, I'm really proud and pleased to introduce Dr. Eyal Mayroz. He's speaking to us today from Australia. And of course, he'll be looking at the international responses to the Ukraine situation. Over to you, Eyal. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm speaking today from the Blue Mountains in Australia, the land of the Darug and the Gadangara nations that was never ceded, and so I pay respects to them and to their elders. I was asked to talk about the wider implications of what we are seeing today in the last 3 weeks in terms of international responses, which has been globally my research topics for the last 15 years or so. So certainly what we are seeing, despite what some people are saying in the media and elsewhere, we have seen an unprecedented mobilizations by different actors, if you like, in what at the end of the day makes international relations, and especially when the publics are involved, the media. But unlike in previous situations, tragedies, we see some new incoming new actors, corporations, maybe also some international associations. Despite what Serhii said, that we do have to check about some of them, there has been an unprecedented support, and very quick one, by sports associations and others that we haven't seen in the past. So my question, I guess, is how one-off is what we are seeing, which is excellent and should be maintained over time, because one of the challenges of international mobilization is to sustain it. The media has been very instrumental in pushing the international agenda, but the media also has a tendency to get tired and move to new and other conflicts. And so this is really important, that this unsurpassed attention, mobilization by all these actors, new and old, be maintained over time, and not allow politicians to ride out this media interest and public interest. So we're seeing all these actors, and what I would like to do in the next 10 or so minutes is to look at the phenomena and the implications, as well as the causes, for either mobilization or lack of mobilizations in previous and current situations, and then compare that to Ukraine, so that we can understand and we can learn from what is taking place, and maybe take lessons where we should do better in the relation to Ukraine, but also in relation to the rest of the world, to so many conflicts that are either completely disappearing off our maps and off our media coverage, that are so important. I think that we are standing in front of a potentially major change in how the world, how 5 billion people treat the suffering of others, that we can either learn from and harness, or again go back to apathy, which has characterized our relations with these suffering people all over the world. So that's what I would like to do. I think to start off with what is happening in Ukraine and why such a great mobilizations, I'd point out to a few reasons. We have a villain that everyone loves to hate, in the form of Putin. We have heroes that nobody expected the Ukrainian people to mount such a defense. And when we have heroes and villains, it's already a recipe for media attention, but also for public attention. We have innocent victims. It's very common in relation to parts of the world that we don't know much about, when we hear about conflicts and wars, that we're not sure whether one side is the villain and the other side is innocent. But certainly it's very easy to see how, in the case of Ukraine, the suffering people of Ukraine are completely innocent. I'll just preface here that sometimes that's one of the reasons why it's easier for us to mount international mobilization towards natural disasters, because it's clear to everyone that the victims are innocent. So we are seeing something that is quite unique here in terms of that. I will talk a little bit later about identification and empathy, which have been unsurpassed, and what can we learn from that, but also various forms of fear that are supporting the level of empathy. In this case, whereas in other situations, fear is actually a block to empathy. So I'll talk about that as well. So the question is, why do we as citizens, particularly in democratic systems, have been allowing our governments to get away with bystanders behavior, and what is different about the Ukraine? So just a quick overview of what the governments are taking into account when they make decisions. What are the constraints, their interests, their concerns, the insufficient resources for the international community and for governments, the high risks and costs of action, which also very often lower the amount of political will that we see. Short-term election cycles, so many of our elected officials are more concerned about how they're going to do in the next election, and often many of the work that needs to be done in order to prevent or stop these long suffering or long-term conflict relates to very long-term action. And so politicians are less interested to put in the effort and the costs and the resources that will lead to good outcomes in 10 years, because they need good outcomes for the next election. And finally, those international constraints that we're also familiar with in the Security Council that we're seeing now with Russia blocking anything, but also in other organizations. And so the outcome is that in many cases, the governments who are meant to protect their own citizens have been, and I'm not saying that the case in Ukraine, because obviously the Ukrainian government is not doing that, but have been in many other cases, actually the culprit and the perpetrators, or in other cases, the bystanders of mass atrocities around the world. And the point that is often missed by the media and also by politicians, but also by scholars, is that a lot of the decision making at the international level is first and foremost being decided domestically. So us as citizens of our own countries can have a much stronger say and much more role to play in influencing our government's decision. And so when our governments go into those international fora, they already have a more empathetic and less apathetic policies to work with in terms of negotiating international responses. Some of the challenges to why we as public don't do more is, some of them are quite obvious, but they are still very important. We are so preoccupied with our daily responsibilities. We also prioritize our own concerns, domestic concerns about the state of the economy, about our security, and so on. There's also obviously compassion fatigue, where we see these conflicts in faraway countries that are continuously either occurring or reoccurring. And so, to hear about stories, sad stories that we feel that we don't have much power to do anything about, is really, over time, is really burning a lot of people. And so that's really crucial to understand that this is not the case. Leadership, we're starving for really, leaders around the world in our own countries that have a vision, that they are not only looking at the political bottom line, but also at international, in this case, public good. So this is really critical, and we have not seen that much of that over the last, I would say, even century. Going back to the public in terms of not knowing what to do, I think what is special about Ukraine is that we've seen this unprecedented public pressure that indeed coincided with the interests of governments to produce such an important and strong international opinion that doesn't usually exist. And I think that to understand that is part of the story. Another part is for us, again, 5 billion adults around the world who don't want to see so much suffering and so much killing, to understand that we do have more power than we are used to believe in. And hopefully this is, part of the message of what is happening in the Ukraine, if we do get, manage to sustain that pressure and to get positive results. Another two aspects is, first of all, the information that is usually framed by governments to the people through the media, that usually points to what the governments want to do, and that is often very weak policy. So this is really critical. What information is being conveyed to us as citizens, and how is it framed? And finally, that governments, when they don't want to do much, they take steps, including framing information, to manage us to manage the public in ways that would suit their purposes that we need again to fight against. And then I want to say a few words now about identification and mainly empathy that already was mentioned. This is an example from the US, how American administrations over time had always said never again, not on my watch in relation to genocide, but then in most cases did very little in the face of genocide, but also public opinion that in surveys supports strong US action, but when the politicians don't do much, then we have a society-wide silence during past genocide. So understanding that the difference between rhetoric and behavior is really critical. So what are the objectives of managing the public for these governments? On one hand, managing the potential risks or costs that they don't want to take. At the same time, ensure legitimacy for their preferred policies, which have in the past often been ineffective, but at the same time trying to avoid the stigma of bystanders to mass atrocities or mass violence. This is the calculations that animate and that inform the decision-making of our government. So they frame information to do all these things, like influence the agenda and the visibility of conflicts, highlight the risk and costs of what they don't want the policies to be, and hide also, or try to avoid discussing alternative policies to what they want. Encourage feeling among the public that we can't make a difference. And that has been over and over again in many cases in the past. There's not much we can do, which is usually not true. And finally, if all else fails, then blame others for inaction. This, I'll leave that this is part of my research about the use of the word genocide. So what we see, and I saw that in my research in the case of the US, was that American politicians have successfully managed the public through a combination of three things. First of all, half-measure actions, doing something knowing that it will not make a big difference. Second, using, on one hand, moralizing rhetoric, but at the same time cautious so that they don't get into trouble over promising something that they are not intending to deliver. For example, calling a crisis genocide when they think that the public will then want to see them doing more. And finally, we talked again about the framing of information in the way that suits their purposes. So one conclusion in my research so far has been that, and that's the other side, that's the public side, is that unfortunately, one of the reasons why managing the public has been relatively easy is that very often we, the public, are okay with being managed. So let's look on some of the reasons for that, and I want to look at the empathy. Empathy, colloquially, is used to describe sympathy, kindness, caring, compassion, but empathy also has a narrower understanding of empathy if you're a psychologist, which I'm not, and that's putting ourselves in someone else's shoes and understanding or feeling someone else's pain or suffering. And actually, research has shown that when we hear about suffering of others, or when we see it through visuals, such as the visuals we've seen before, the same parts of our brain that fire when we actually experience physical or emotional suffering is firing when we just hear or watch it from far away. There are two parts of the brain that work and inform how we process information. One of them is experiential and very quick, very intuitive, which is how empathy arises. And the other one is slower, more analytic. And one of the problems is that empathy can, obviously, as we see now, can lead to action, but at the same time, it has many challenges that we need to understand and try to overcome. So one of the challenges is that empathy is very difficult to sustain. You hear the webinar here, but 5 minutes after you come out, you'll be able to, think of other things or even laugh at other things, because our protective systems in our brain, in our mental processes, is such that it's protecting us from fully feeling over time the suffering of other people, and that's a protective mechanisms that we have. Another one is that we don't want to experience suffering over time, and that partly relates to what I talked about, compassion fatigue. It's very hard for most of us to, experience suffering, and so we don't want to, so we shut off. A third issue is that research has shown that it's very easy to identify with one victim than with many. And Mother Teresa said famously, if I look at the mass, I'll never act. If I look at one, I will. But also more recent research has shown that when we hear about one victim, a personal story, then we have more compassion towards that person, and we have more willingness to help than with two people. And when we hear about two kids, we have more compassion than for 4 kids. And when we get to thousands, these become almost meaningless. They become statistics and numbers, and so our ability to empathize gets reduced. So what we need is really ways of how to, deal and improve our ability as, a global community to act, even when empathy is difficult to sustain. Another challenge is that, and I talked about that already, is that it's more difficult to empathize with victims of man-made or human-made tragedies than natural disasters, and I mentioned why. It's very easy to think of victims of natural disasters as completely innocent, but when we hear about something that is happening in Yemen or in Afghanistan, we think, okay, maybe they did something, or maybe it's not as easy as that. So another reason is that when natural disasters occur, we know how to help. We give money, we give blankets, we give food, but for man-made or human-made conflict, it's much more difficult. We don't know how to help, how to stop this, violence sometimes. And so when we identify with people, the more we identify with people, we do have more empathy to them. But at the same time, fear can also come into the picture, and fear can come into the picture in 2 ways. So we can, identify based on physical or emotional proximity, as we see now in Ukraine. The amount of empathy and goodwill in Europe is surpassing anything we've seen, and that's, as we talked about Moldova and other places, certainly a mix of different physical proximity but also cultural and emotional proximity. At the same time, those people who are most in need of our identification and empathy in previous cases in faraway countries are often the people that we tend to identify the least with, and that's a problem. So, for example, if you remember in 2015 terrorist attacks in Paris, the whole Western world was up in flames. Identification, empathy, but also fear in this case leading to that, supporting that empathy. For example, we are so used to being, bystanders to mass atrocities in faraway lands, but when terrorism raises its head, then all of a sudden we are no longer bystanders, we are also potential victims, which is what is happening actually in Europe now. The fear of what is to happen with Russia is mixed with identification and leads to this greater empathy. So I think this is really important to understand, and that media obviously has a very important role to play, both a positive one, but also a negative, as we familiar with Fox News and how they work on our fears. And in some cases, empathy can be blocked by fear, because the same part of the brain is responsible for both. So low identification leads to indifference and to inaction often. And the outcomes is that governments have easygoing and less worries about the public in crafting what have in the past often been ineffective policies on their part. So then back to the question that I started with, what is happening with Ukraine? Is it a one-off? And if so, why? I think we covered some of the reasons that are responsible for the unprecedented support for Ukraine, a combination of empathy, emotional proximity, physical proximity in some cases, but also fear of what is to happen if another Chernobyl takes place, or if the war escalates to other parts of Europe, and so on. The ability of the public and the media to cover, from within Ukraine what is taking place, and the public as a watcher and is also unprecedented in many other cases, in Sudan, in Darfur. What the first thing that the Sudanese government did was to close Darfur to media. And so when we don't have those visuals that we talked about earlier, then it's much more difficult to empathize and to remain engaged with the conflict. So this identification.
Sorry to interrupt. Could I ask you to come to your final points? It's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm closing. And the important thing is if we can also set a new precedent and hope for collective security, non-military action, as partly at least we see now in other parts of the world, and this is really critical. I have 2 more slides just on what we need to continue working on, which I'll just very quickly go through. So more political leadership, reduce the gap between words and deeds, listen to NGOs. The NGOs often do have the warning signs and the political recommendations of what to do, reduce the powerlessness sense for the public, that we can now see that we can influence policies more than in the past, and try to increase the visibility of other conflicts and how we can take on more effective policies, and finally expose public management when we see that through responsible medias. And so if we can increase the links, understanding of the links between faraway conflicts and what we are experiencing at home in terms of all the things that we are afraid of, deterioration into mass violence, destabilization of regions, refugee flows, creating safe haven for terrorism in the case of terrorism, then this can be different. And of course, the most important thing is prevention. If you prevent something, you don't need to react. And this is where I'll end up. So thank you very much.
That was wonderful. Thank you. And sorry to interrupt there. That was really, really insightful. Thank you. Very, very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Eyal. Fantastic. Wonderful. We're coming to the end. We've come slightly over time, everybody. My apologies for that. But of course, as you can appreciate, this is an extremely valuable, insightful proposition, something we need to hear from the Ukrainians. We need to hear the impact it's having on people, as Eyal has correctly emphasized. There are a lot of comments and questions going through the chats and the Q&A. I hope a lot of those have been answered. Apologies if they are not. I think there are many take-homes from this. Conflict has a face, and that face is innocent people a lot of the time. The reasons how conflicts happen can be complex, and we can debate those. I could ask some people in the chat to be mindful and be sensitive to that. But really, I'd like to just spotlight one more time our panelists today. Eyal has given a fantastic overview of the nature of conflict and how that is framed. I might tie that in with Tetiana and Serhii. A lot of people have asked questions about donations, connections, what can we do? This sense of powerlessness or powerfulness. One thing I took from Eyal's message there is that, particularly in this situation, we were noticing the impact that people in neighbouring countries are having for refugees. People are opening their hearts. We can do things. We can work, we can stop this, we can put pressure on our governments, we can share, we can work together, and together we have that power. And that is one thing that's wonderful about the global green movement. We work to consensus and ideas, and we can spotlight and support each other and show solidarity. There was an early question from Bernard Martin in French to Tetiana and Serhii, asking about donations. How can people donate money, or where they should do that? Maybe there's a place or time you can do that now if you want to put something in the chat. To everybody who is watching, I would say we have this gift of social media. Tetiana and the Ukrainian Greens are on Facebook and other social media outlets. Connect with those guys. Perhaps you can share some details on there, Tetiana. That might be worthwhile. Please do connect to the Global Green social media as well. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We'll be posting more things and ask questions through that. Eyal has his information as well. I don't know if you're on Twitter, if you want to share any more details of that. Again, that's a really fascinating overview. Dr. Peter has put his email in the chat. Again, a fantastic overview of the food security implications. There's a big crisis happening here. We're watching it unfold. And again, I'd like to show our solidarity with the Ukrainians. As Eyal pointed out, you are heroes. You've stood up to a massive aggressor. How and where that's come about and the faults is a separate conversation, but we are standing with you, and you're doing everything you can to stand up to that, and we do stand with you too. So thank you so much. Gianmarco has also shared his website and Instagram in there. He's taken pictures of refugees and other social issues throughout the world. He's very, very renowned for doing that. Do check out his wonderful, emotional, and very human images there. And there is a face to what's happening here. And I'm sort of humbled and proud to stand here today with the Global Greens and offer our spotlight to Ukraine, to Tetiana and Serhii. And perhaps if you don't mind, Tetiana or Serhii, would you like to offer us just a couple of words to finish with, if that's okay? I don't want to put you on the spot. Is that okay? So just for the last sort of few moments, over to Tetiana. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all support. This is very important for us, and we will win. We will stand, but we need your help.
Thank you so much, Tetiana. We know that there will be peace, and we hope very, very soon. Okay. So thank you for everybody. Thank you, Tetiana. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I hope we've done something today. Please do keep sharing, do keep connecting, work with each other, work together. Together we have power, and together we all do our little part, and hopefully there will be peace in Ukraine and we can stop this unnecessary aggression and work towards this not happening around the world. You know, I think we all want to be in a place where this is just not happening. Okay. Thank you for everybody attending from Mexico, where it's very early morning, through to New Zealand, where it's very, very late night, and everybody in between. I think we've had Uganda, all throughout Europe, Australia, the Middle East. This is a wonderful global movement we have. Together, we can make a difference, and together we have that power. So one more time, thank you so much, Tetiana and Serhii, and to everybody in Ukraine. You are heroes. We are alongside you. Let's keep fighting that fight, and hopefully very, very soon we'll have the peace that you deserve. I'd like to thank the interpreters, for those in French and Spanish. I didn't shout that at the start. There's a lot of people behind the scenes here making this happen. So thank you to the Global Greens team who've done that. Thank you to the interpreters giving their time and energy and expertise out of the kindness of their hearts. I hope that's made a difference to some of you too. Again, thank you, Eyal. Thank you, Gianmarco. Thank you, Peter. And again, thank you, Tetiana and Serhii. Good morning. Good night, good evening, and goodbye, everybody. Thank you.